Let's begin with global markets. In Asia, Chinese stocks closed higher on Tuesday, with the benchmark Shanghai Composite Index up 0.60%. Hong Kong stocks went up 0.79%. The 225-issue Nikkei stock average added 0.30%. The US dollar declined against most major currencies on Monday, following weak US inflation readings. Oil prices rose on Monday following news that the U.S. is considering stepping up sanctions against Venezuela. Gold futures on the COMEX division of the New York Mercantile Exchange fell slightly on Monday, but a weakening U.S. dollar drove the precious metal higher in July. Here's the latest on the U.S. stocks from correspondent Su Omeng in New York.
Okay, let's take a look at our stocks market. The Dow Jones Industrial Average notched the record high on Monday, the last trading day of July, as this earnings season has been strong so far. Latest data from Thomson Reuters show that S&P 500 companies' blended earnings in the second quarter of 2017 are expected to rise 10.8% year-on-year, while the revenues are forecast to increase 4.9%. Over 70% of the S&P 500 companies that had reported had topped estimates on both the top and bottom lines. Wall Street cheered on the strong earnings season, which has largely been supportive of stock markets in July. U.S. equities notched record highs last week, but some analysts said the tech sector might continue to face pressure from profit-taking following upbeat earnings. The Nasdaq Composite fell on Monday as large-cap tech stocks like Facebook and Alphabet pulled back. Tech giant Apple is scheduled to report later this week. This is Omeng, reporting from New York Stock Exchange.
Thank you, Omeng. Now turning to agriculture futures. Here's Virginia McGathy in Chicago with the latest.
I'm Virginia McGathy here on the floor at the CME Group, reporting to you on the grain market. Today, the last day of the month, soybeans were lower. Favorable weather really weakened the grains across the board. Month-end trading blues kind of gave a mixed message today, so the markets were kind of up and down, but futures really remain in a short-term channel. That being said, the market's not over yet. This weather market isn't over yet, so there's a lot to be looking at right now. With corn, the market also dropped. There's been some small rains in the corn belt, and it motivated some traders to take some profit here at the end of the month. And so we see the prices a little bit lower. They weren't drastically lower, but, futures, they gap lower, as this month really comes to an end. And it kind of shrugs off the fact that the USDA report came out that 150,000 metric tons were sold to Colombia. So I guess the market just feels that that's already in the market right now. Tomorrow could be the consummate turnaround Tuesday, so we're going to watch that closely. As wheat also fell in the market, global supplies really remain pretty ample right now, and they're holding the market steady. It's certainly this new short-term low that the wheat got to today offered a little bit of support because the market bounced off that somewhat. But here we are at the end of July. Everyone kind of closing their books somewhat. We're going to open it up again tomorrow. We're looking for a lot more activity to start the month of August. That's all from the floor at the CME Group. I'm Virginia McGathy.
Thank you very much, Virginia. And to keep you updated on the daily agriculture futures. New figures showed the Eurozone economy continues to recover. Unemployment in the Eurozone jumped to 9.1% in June, the lowest in 8 years.
According to Eurostat, unemployment in the Eurozone fell to 9.1% in June, down from 9.2% in May. This is the lowest level since February 2009, before the financial crisis took hold. Unemployment in the wider EU stayed at 7.7% in June, the same as May, but well down on the 8.6% a year ago. This is the lowest rate since December 2008. The jobless figures come a week after the IMF said the Eurozone economic recovery was broad and strengthening, but warned that low inflation, fragile banks and Brexit remained significant risks.
Inflation in the Eurozone held steady at 1.3% in July. However, core inflation rose to its highest level in 4 years.
According to the European Union Statistics Agency, annual inflation in the Eurozone stayed at 1.3% in July, the same rate as June. Energy prices, meanwhile, are up 2.2% compared to last July. Core inflation, which excludes volatile food and energy prices, edged up slightly in July to 1.3% from 1.2% in June. While below the central bank's target rate of 2%, core inflation is now at its highest level in 3 years. The news is likely to ease the pressure on the European Central Bank as it considers scaling back its massive stimulus program.
Last month's round of Brexit negotiations against ended with the two sides unable to bridge their differences. We sat down with an expert and asked what this means for future negotiations between the UK and Europe, and where they might compromise on issues like financial settlements, court of law, and the Northern Irish border. Let's take a look.
The Brexit talks is bringing together two. On one side, 27 EU members who would rather the bloc's second biggest economy didn't leave, but are keen to send a message if it does. On the other, Prime Minister Theresa May, wounded by poor election result, and leader of a cabinet who are openly disagreeing in public. The Brexit negotiations are scheduled to take 2 years, but according to Dr. Raman Pachio-Pardo, a senior lecturer of King's College London, this may not be enough.
I think the UK and the European Union will have to reach an agreement, but I think that this round of meetings has shown how difficult this is going to be. The position of the UK is still a little bit unknown. The European Union has very clear red lines, and it is not going to cross those red lines. So I think that the UK and the European Union are going to take longer than we thought to reach an agreement. But I think we will get an agreement because the UK has said very clearly it is going to leave the European Union, so it has to reach this agreement to do so.
Complicating matters is June's general election result. Theresa May went to the polls seeking an improved majority and a stronger negotiating position with the EU. She actually ended up losing seats and is only still Prime Minister thanks to a power-sharing agreement.
Now we see a larger number of people in the UK asking to rethink Brexit. I don't think, to be honest, this is going to happen because the government has made very clear that this is what it's going to do. It actually won the election. After all, it is governing coalition. So I don't think there is going to be a reversal of Brexit. But I think there is already a reassessment going on. And this reassessment involves two different issues. First of all, the UK is going to try to have a closer relationship with the European Union than Theresa May said in the beginning she was going to. So I think hard Brexit is very difficult that it is going to happen. We're moving towards a soft Brexit. And the second part of the reassessment is that many British people have realized the benefits of being close to the European Union, the single market, free movement of people. And I think that the UK is going to try to retain some of the benefits of European Union membership while trying to leave the European Union. I don't think the European Union is going to agree to this, but I think that the UK is going to press for this.
According to the Treaty of Lisbon, the EU and the UK need to complete the Brexit negotiations by March the 29th, 2019. However, Michel Barnier hopes that the final version of the Brexit agreement could be completed by October 2018, so that the European Parliament and the European Council would approve the agreement by the deadline.
I think that the main difference between the UK and the European Union is that many in the UK still think that the country can have his cake and eat it, as Boris Johnson said in the past. So many people think they still can get a bespoke agreement. The European Union has made very clear that this is not going to happen. You're either inside of the European Union or you're outside.
A key issue in the Brexit referendum was UK opposition to one of the EU's 4 freedoms, the free movement of people. Over 3 million Europeans live in the UK, and while Dr. Pardo thinks negotiation on free movement would be a non-starter, he says there are other areas where the two sides can find consensus.
And secondly, I think that the UK, for example, wants to pick and choose. So it wants to have, for example, a strong relationship when it comes to the university and education system, when it comes, for example, to nuclear technology, maybe with regards to security matters, and the European Union is not willing to contemplate this. And I think that's the main difference, that the bespoke agreement that the UK still thinks it can have is not on offer by the European Union. And this is something that is going to be quite difficult to breach.
While the end of negotiations may still be a long way off, Dr. Pardo says the UK is already feeling the effects of Brexit.
So both the UK and the European Union are going to suffer economically. politically I would say as well, but the UK obviously is going to suffer more. I think we already seen an economic slowdown here in the UK even before the country has left the European Union. While the European Union economy is actually improving from before, but I think will suffer in the future. Politically, relations are not going to be as close, obviously, so there are going to be differences on different issues. For example, security, there might be differences, maybe even climate change, different issues. There's not going to be the close relationship that the UK had with other European Union countries when it was part of it. And I think that when it comes to the situation of European citizens in the UK, we have already seen that Theresa May and the current government is not willing to provide European citizens with the same rights that they had when they actually came to the European Union. For example, when it comes to the possibility of moving your family to the UK. So I think that European citizens are going to suffer. I think free movement of people is going to stop. There might be some degree of easiness for European citizens vis-a-vis other citizens to come to the UK. Maybe if they have a job offer, they can move without any problems. But I think that free movement of people is going to finish, and European citizens are actually going to have less rights in the UK than they have currently.
The third round of Brexit negotiation between the UK and the EU is scheduled for late August.
The United States has imposed sanctions on Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro after the country held its National Constituent Assembly on Sunday.
In his statement on Monday, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said the U.S. was showing its opposition.
By sanctioning Maduro, the United States makes clear our opposition to the policies of his regime and the support for the people of Venezuela, who strive to return their country to a full and prosperous democracy.
The statement also warned that everyone who participates in the National Assembly could be exposed to future U.S. sanctions.
Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, has sanctioned the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro Moros. As a result of today's sanctions, all assets of Maduro subject to U.S. jurisdiction are frozen, and U.S. persons are prohibited from dealing with him.
The move follows sanctions already in place against 13 current or former senior Venezuelan officials. More than 8 million people, just over 40% of the electorate, turned out on Sunday to elect a new National Constituent Assembly. Their primary task will be the controversial job of rewriting Venezuela's constitution. Nationwide violence on the streets has led to more than 110 people dead since April.
Egypt's trade deficit dropped by 43.8% in May from a year earlier, the Egypt State Statistical Body revealed on Monday. Let's take a look.
Egypt's trade deficit in May decreased by 43.8% from a year ago. The trade deficit reached approximately $2.32 billion versus $4.14 billion a year earlier. Exports witnessed 8.8% increase on year-on-year basis, rising from $2.09 billion to $2.28 billion. Meanwhile, imports decreased by 26.1%, dropping from $6.32 billion to $4.6 billion. The trade balance is one component of the balance of payments. Egypt has been struggling to tackle an economic crisis. The crisis is caused in part by an acute foreign currency shortage, surging inflation and low levels of tourism and investment.
In India, the implementation of Goods and Services Tax, or GST, the country's biggest tax reform since independence, is bringing the unorganized sector under the tax net. But now small businesses, the country's dominant economic sector, are facing challenges with GST's implementation. Our CNC correspondent wants to see how the reform could affect India's business sector. India is implementing GST, the country's biggest tax reform since independence, but the multi-rate GST is difficult for traders and consumers to understand. Traders even recently launched a strike because of the losses they incurred through GST. There are over 3 million SMEs in India, contributing to almost 50% of industrial output and 42% of India's total exports. Small and medium enterprises are the primary drivers of the Indian economy's growth, but now retailers say business has gone down by over 50%. New Delhi's textile traders are concerned about business because before GST clothes were not taxable. Now traders have to pay 5% tax on a transaction of up to $15 and a 12% above that. The clothes business mostly runs through wholesalers who will now have to maintain systematic records after GST, which they didn't before.
Since GST came into ruling, the flow of customers in the market has gone down a bit. In future, I think GST will be good for business, but at the moment, it means a complete systematic overhaul. I never used to maintain our accounts precisely before, but now we have to do proper computerized account maintenance and keep an up-to-date records of the stock. We have also hired a chartered account and applied for registration with the GST network.
India's media said GST is now increasing running costs and it brings down profits initially, but long term it will bring small businesses in line with bigger enterprises. This will make small businesses more competitive and professional.
GST is good for the business overall, but the government needs to be very strict about checking its implementation. The authorities need to be strict so that all businesses accept it unanimously. That will be collectively good for business in future.
Turkish ministers have sought to calm tensions after Germany threatened to reduce its investment in the country. Economy Report has more. Turkish Deputy Prime Minister Mehmet Şimşek took to German magazine Der Spiegel to declare to the business community that Turkey remains an open, liberal, and investment-friendly country. He said investments by German firms in Turkey are safe and their businesses will not be affected by political tension between Ankara and Berlin. It's the latest in the line of attempts made by the Turkish government to prevent its squabbles with Germany turning into lost revenue. In July, German Foreign Minister Sigmar Gabriel threatened to slap sanctions on Turkey after it arrested human rights activists, including a German citizen. Gabriel cautioned fellow Germans against traveling to Turkey and threatened to slow investment in the country. A number of Germany's leading firms have sizable business in the country, including Daimler AG, Deutsche Bank, Siemens, and Volkswagen. Last year, trade volume between the two countries reached $35 billion. Germany is also the biggest exporter of tourists to Turkey. 5.5 million German tourists visited Turkey in 2015, although the number dropped to only 3.8 million last year. Economists warn that Turkey's economy could slow down in the upcoming period, citing a decline in direct foreign investment in recent years and strained foreign ties. Zimbabwe should phase out its use of the US dollar as it's a dead end. That's the view of an economic consultant who has been advising the government on how to address its growing money problem. When hyperinflation hit Zimbabwe in 2009, much of its population turned to the US dollar. But according to Professor Ashok Chakravarty, economic consultant to the Office of the President and Cabinet of Zimbabwe, this can only be a temporary solution.
Once the dollarization had happened, you have to then make a plan to de-dollarize. You can't just say, now we've gone and it's a good situation, because dollarization can't last forever. The only, as I said in my presentation, for dollarization to succeed, you've got to have a regular supply of dollars. And in Zimbabwe, we don't have a regular supply of dollars, either through the financial system or if we had very strong exports.
Again, Zimbabwe is facing a cash and liquidity crisis. To help, last year the country introduced the bond note, although the public remain wary. Memories of hyperinflation still fresh in their minds. Instead, many have been turning up on the black market in neighboring countries.
I think it has become very clear that bond notes are not a permanent solution to the country's cash challenges. Yes, they identified production as the major missing link in the country's growth matrix. It is quite a missing link at the moment, but they are arguably less potent as bond notes to growing or to affecting positively production in the country. There is need, therefore, for supply-side interventions.
With cash running out and more Zimbabweans struggling to pay off their debts, the answer may lie in digital currencies such as e-wallets. It's an area the government has been pushing for, although many small to medium firms are reluctant to take on the costs. More news from China. Several institutions have raised their forecast for China's economy, noting that China remains a powerful engine of global economy.
China reported 6.9% GDP growth for the first half of 2017, exceeded the 6.7% rise in 2016, beat the consensus of forecasters. The IMF saw China's 2017 growth at 6.7%, 0.1 percentage points higher than its last estimate. It showed the fund's confidence in Chinese economy, considering solid first quarter underpinned by previous policy easing and supply-side reform.
云天无际，承载梦想。中国南方航空是中国运输飞机最多、航线网络最发达、年客运量最大的航空公司。亚洲第一，全球第三，是南航缔造的业界奇迹。蓝天壮志情，云海谱华章。
专业的团队，丰厚的经验。
Welcome to Chicago. Welcome to the Lake Cook Law Group.
投资理财、法律咨询，芝加哥专业律师团队为您的梦想提供最安全的保障。
Hi, this is Little Chinese Channel, 小小中文, Lesson 45. In this lesson, we'll be studying these 5 radicals. For the first radical, we use a dot, a stroke that looks like this, a vertical stroke, finally a small dot. This radical is called 士字旁, 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 comes from the character 士, which means showing. This radical is often at the left of a character. Here are some examples of that. For the next radical, we use a vertical stroke, a horizontal stroke with a turn, 2 vertical strokes, and then a horizontal stroke. This radical is called 四字头, 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 四字头. Comes from the character 四, means 4. We learned 四 in lesson 35. 四字头 is often at the top of a character. Here are some examples of that. For the third radical, we use a downstroke to the left, a horizontal stroke, two more horizontal strokes, and finally a vertical stroke with a hook at the end. This radical is called 金字旁, 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 comes from the character 金, which means gold. This radical is often at the left of a character, and most of the characters that 金字旁 can make are related with metal. Here are some examples. For the next radical, this is 广. If we add 2 more dots to 广 from lesson 4, it turns into 病字旁病字旁病字旁病字旁 comes from the character 病, which means sick. This radical is often at the left of a character, and most of the characters that 病字旁can make are related with disease. Here are some examples of what 病字旁 is a building block of. For the last radical, we use 是. This is the radical we learned in this lesson. If we add just one more dot, it turns into a whole new radical called 一字旁一字旁一字旁一字旁 comes from the character 一, which means clothes. This radical is often at the left of a character, and most of the characters that 一字旁 can make are related with clothes. Here are some examples of that. Okay, let's write. Remember when you're writing to follow stroke sequence. 是字旁四字头金字旁病字旁一字旁 Bye-bye, the lesson is done.